blues scale. What? Huh? Yeah. You've heard of the blues scale. You probably already know how to play it. It's related to the pentatonic scale. In fact, it is a minor pentatonic scale with one additional note. But getting this scale to phrase well, to really phrase this scale musically, can be a little tricky. Welcome back to the channel. My name's Chris. Today you will learn a couple of tips for integrating the blues scale. Now, when I learned this scale, I had a hard time with it. It was a little difficult for me to integrate it. I sort of looked at it as the red-headed stepchild of the minor pentatonic scale, with that one extra note that both made it a little bit more difficult to play, as well as that one note, that extra note, sometimes it sounded great and sometimes it sounded terrible. And so I had a hard time, and it wasn't until much, much later that I was able to integrate this scale the way I heard my heroes playing it. So it's a little tricky, right? It's not just the pentatonic scale, it's the pentatonic scale plus another guy. So I'm going to summarize what the scale is all about, how we build it, why it's called the blues scale, why it sounds the way it does. And then I'm going to give you a couple of tips that I've used to integrate this scale in a real musical way, right? Just a couple of tips to turn this scale into something that you can actually phrase with, because while it is related to the pentatonic scale, the blues scale requires a bit more thoughtful approach to really get it to sound good. Before we get started, if you enjoy this channel, you like the style with which I teach, you're enjoying the content that I provide, consider supporting the channel through Patreon. It's through Patreon that you can have access to tabs for this lesson, as well as all the lessons on the channel, and you can also gain access to my teaching platform. If you do decide to support the channel, let me just thank you in advance. I'm going to show you some tips that I use to really integrate the blues scale into my playing. First thing we're going to do is just look at the scale from a theoretical standpoint, like how is it built? We're going to be using the E blues scale here. The blues scale is actually the minor pentatonic scale with another note added to it. Here's the minor pentatonic scale. Here's that scale's formula: root, flat 3, 4, 5, flat 7, root. Now, before I go on, I just want to, for those of you who are not familiar with these numbers, playing the E major scale, the major scale is the scale which we measure everything else. That's where we get all these numbers, is from the major scale. The major scale's numbers are root, here's the second note, third note, fourth note, fifth note, sixth note, seventh note, back to the root. 1, 2, 3, 4, 5, 6, 7, 1. When you apply that reasoning to the minor pentatonic scale, you get these intervals: root, flat 3, 4, 5, flat 7, root. Now, the blues scale simply adds a note that we call the flat 5. So here's what that looks like: root, flat 3, 4, flat 5, 5, flat 7, root. And as you can see, there's one note difference, right? Changes the scale from a 5-note scale into a 6-note scale. Now, if I play that across the entire position, in other words, taking the minor pentatonic scale and just add the flat 5 throughout that entire position, it looks like this. Now, this note we've added, that's the flat 5, right? Listen to it. Listen to it against the root. It really doesn't play nice. It creates a massive amount of sort of dissonance. It doesn't play nice with any of the notes in the scale, actually. It's that dissonant. That's because this interval is a tritone. If you want to know more about tritones, I did a video here all about tritones. Very, very cool. But this tritone creates a lot of dissonance. It's just a really, really harsh note harmonically. Most players, when they come across this flat 5, they phrase it as a passing tone. So let me just show you something. Here's our scale. Using this position, I'm going to show you a phrase that uses that flat 5 as a passing tone. And the technique we're going to be using is called a trill. And a trill is just a rapid succession of notes that are close by. So here's the figure. Check this out. it is nice and slow. I'm just going up the minor pentatonic scale here from the D string. That's just minor pentatonic. Then I'm returning to the G string and I'm doing this trill. There's that flat 5. But as you can see, I'm not landing on it. I'm just going. That trill is one of the primary secrets of the blues scale. Just using that flat 5 as a passing tone, just as a little bit of flavor across other notes in a phrase. Now, it's important that you map any scale you ever learn across the entire fretboard, right? Just give yourself the opportunity to play any scale you learn everywhere on the fretboard. That's just a fundamental thing you should be striving to do at all times. So, it goes to say that if indeed all of these notes are available all over the fretboard, this trill can be played all over the fretboard as well. So that note, wherever you find this phrase, wherever you map it, it's everywhere, right? So once you map the scale to the entire fretboard, you can then take this technique and play it anywhere you want to. Okay, so now using that same position, I'm going to show you another phrase. This one introduces the idea that even though the flat 5 is here in the position, this note also occurs on the B string right behind the scale. So listen to this phrase. Check this out. This phrase sort of anchors that flat 5 on the B string here. Here it is nice and slow. So that helps sort of reimagine where that flat 5 is, because as we know, the flat 5, the 4, the flat 5, and the 5 are just half steps away from each other. Okay, last lick in this position. This is sort of a much more complex lick, and it just integrates this flat 5, this one, and this one, all in one lick. So that's a little more complex. As you can see, what I'm doing here is using the flat 5 here, and here, and here. That's the lick is a little more advanced, but as you can see, sort of it gets a really nice bounce between that flat 5 here and the one here. G string 15th fret, B string 11th fret. Okay, now the 6-note structure of the blues scale allows us to map it as a 3-note per string structure. Let me just show you an example of that. I'm going to be starting below the scale. We're in the key of E here. Here's E. I'm starting below the root a whole step, just so I can map it as a 3-note per string shape. Check this out. 1, 2, 3, 1, 2, 3, 1, 2, 3, 1, 2, 3, 1, 2, 3. I change strings every 3 notes. Very, very cool. Pushes you out linearly, gets you to start mapping the scale naturally across the fretboard in a linear way. When I take that to its natural conclusion and just sort of continue that mapping, check it out. I can go all the way to the open string here. Using that mapping, that sort of 3-note per string idea, I've got a couple of figures that I want to show you. This first one goes like this. Using this 3-note per string idea, also integrating the trill here. It's a great lick that gets you from the top of the neck sort of into the meat of the neck. Using that same idea, that same sort of 3-note per string mapping where we're not just trapped in this position. Here's another one that incorporates some serious bending. Now these bends are both minor third bends. That means we're bending a step and a half, so just hang on tight. Here's what it sounds like. Starting on the root, I'm playing the 5 here and I'm bending it up a minor third all the way up to the flat 7. Going down chromatically. When I land on this flat 3, I bend it up a minor third to the flat 5. Sort of a Jimmy Page inspired lick. I think Van Halen did something like this as well. And that phrase just gets you to start thinking about targeting these notes at the ends of bends, right? Targeting this flat 5 in a bend. That's where you really start to get control on the sonic personality of the scale, where you can phrase through it and understand where you are in the scale, bend up into target notes on purpose. That's when you're starting to really get a scale under control. Okay, so there it is. That's how I integrated the blues scale. Those few different tips, right? Finding those half steps, those 2 half steps in a row between the 4, the flat 5, and the 5, that's really the juice of where the scale is. Most pentatonic scales, all pentatonic scales don't have a half step. So you don't get that great interval, that half step interval that the major scale and all the major scale derivatives have, that 7-note structure, they have 2 half steps. And then we talked about that trill. That trill is ultimately what I hear sax players, guitar players, piano players, and even vocalists using. That's sort of one of the main tips. Being able to integrate that trill into your phrasing is really where one of the big, powerful elements of the blues scale resides. And then finally, being able to look at that as a 3-note per string structure, right? Not just 2 notes per string, which sort of pushes you vertically across the fretboard, but it's that 3-note per string constraint that allows you to move across the fretboard much more linearly. I hope you've enjoyed this. I hope you found it useful, and I'll see you next time.